Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
It's a Wednesday.
We're back, guys.
Have you missed us?
Have you?
According to our stats, you have not. I'm just kidding.
Womp, womp, womp.
No, so I wanted to start off with sharing a parenting trophy of the year. So for anybody who's ever like, I'm not good enough as a parent. Zach and I took the baby to the Netherlands for spring break. I work overseas, so it's not like we're bougie and we flew to the Netherlands like just for spring break. So it was a drive for us, but we go. And, you know, doing public transportation, never really done that a whole lot before, despite being in Europe. And we, you know, are just taking tram to bus to bus to train to tram. And we were like, we'll just get off here. And we end up walking for a little bit, and we're walking. And the streets get more narrow and more cobblestoney. And I was like, this looks a lot like Bourbon Street. So for those of y'all who don't know, Chelsea and I grew up in the South, and we were like an hour from New Orleans. So Bourbon Street is oh so familiar to us. I was like, this looks like Bourbon Street. And I turned to my husband. I'm like, are we in the red light district? And he was like, there's a really good chance of that. So we get dinner. We ask our waitress. I was like, hey, tourist question, are we in the red light district? And she was like, yes. She's like, we're kind of at the entrance of it. And I was like, oh, excellent, because there's a lot of sex shops around. So that's kind of what gave it away. So we get done with dinner, and I'm just following the GPS on my phone to get to the tram stop that we need to go back to our hotel. And it's like, turn left here, go down this street, and then it's right around the corner. And we turn into the mouth of a strip, and it's really crowded. And I was like, that's weird. It's really crowded down this street. And we walk like 5 yards, and I look up, and I notice the naked sex worker in the window.
Oh, yes.
And she looks at me, and I look at her, and she looks at the baby, and the baby looks at her, and I look at Zach, and Zach looks at me. And I was like, we should probably take a detour, because this is the red light district street, like the road of, you know, like people from all around the world want to be here and do dirty things that I don't think it's appropriate for us with our 3-year-old to be here. And he was like, I concur. So we, you know, turn around, and I notice, of course, hindsight being what it is, there are red bulbs lining this street. Like, it's literally the red light district, right?
No.
And so, you know, I grab the baby's hand and we start walking. Luckily, we didn't get a whole lot of judgy looks. People were just like, that's weird, whatever, it's Amsterdam. And so that was my weekend. Amsterdam's for the birds. If you guys don't know that, it is the most chaotic city I've ever been to, because bicycles will run you over because they have right of way. And when I tell you it is the bicycle capital of the world, they are not exaggerating. And that is my, you know, great parenting story for the weekend.
Yeah, you know, I think that chaos and even New Orleans is going to be parts of the story today.
Yeah, it sure is.
That's going to kind of lead us right into our story. And speaking of bourbon, that's pretty much where this is going to start.
We're not going to give you personal stories of all of the things we've done with bourbon. We're going to jump straight to the professional topic.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But it just so happens that there's this great Venn diagram that's happening with Bailey and me and family and music and New Orleans and all the things. So, like Bailey said, we grew up about, I mean, just less than right at an hour outside of New Orleans. And so I, being the older sister, I don't know, maybe I had more experiences than Bailey in the Big Easy, but I have to say that one of my favorite memories is during the Halloween season. One year I met up with some high school friends and we decided to go to Pantera's House of Shock, which is just this massive looming building, right, that they've turned into this haunted house. And all I really remember was being hoarse by the time
Oh,
that we
because you were
finished.
screaming so much.
Right. We're just screaming our heads off. And I mean it was a little bit too much even for me. I mean this thing was straight gory chaos. And of course, you know, when you're 17, it's pretty cool. Metal wasn't really my thing. Pantera wasn't my thing, but even I at 17 knew that Pantera was legendary.
Yeah.
And so then you fast forward about 3 years, and I meet this really cute boy who is now my husband at a Wednesday night Bible study. But what caught my eye
Was the
was
barbed wire tattoo and the
the
crooked
barbed
hat.
wire. Yeah, the barbed wire tattoo sticking out, you know, that traditional stereotypical 1990s barbed wire tattoo poking out from under his sleeve. And you know, covering this case, it makes me ponder. Maybe I've always been attracted to things with a hint of danger, right?
Except has no danger in his whole body, but the barbed wire makes you think that it's there.
It is. It's a facade of danger.
Yeah.
And then it also makes me wonder, like, maybe this is why so many people loved and really still love Pantera, right? Maybe it's that mixture of like the sweet Southern hospitality mixed with just like melt your face off adrenaline.
Yeah.
And honestly, Bailey, I think that that kind of mixture is an addictive, obsessive blend. And maybe that's why it ended in murder.
Yeah. Well, it's a tragic case and this is interview week, and for those we'll talk about this again in the interview, but Chelsea's husband Lucas
Mhm.
is cousins with the two guys who started Pantera, which is the central to this case. And so I of course didn't really know Pantera was that big. I would think I was too young. But then I would ask people like, "Oh, like, do you know who Pantera is?" And they're like, "Of course I know who Pantera is. They're the rock gods. They're the metal gods, or whatever."
Friggin'
And
Odin.
yeah, so we actually interview one of the few surviving family members of Vinnie Paul and Darrell. So that's the interview this week. We are back to metal. It's not dark Norwegian black death metal or whatever it was, but
It's
it is
not.
it is heavy metal, right?
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, you guys, let's get into the legendary Pantera. Now, there are a number of things that are just fine by themselves, but for some reason, when they come together, a certain kind of magic happens. Like French fries dipped in a chocolate frosty at Wendy's. I'll fight every one of you who say that isn't a thing. Honey ham, and even a cozy blanket in a book or Harry Potter marathons. But for some reason, many believe the joining of the two otherwise underrated things elevates the whole experience. We can agree. In the early 1990s, the music industry and consequently the entire world would find that union of rhythmic, palpable pulse of groove with the powerful grit and aggressive vocals of metal, and found it was a perfect pairing. And the band that is said to have popularized this new groove metal sound was the Texas-based band Pantera. Groove metal, a subgenre of metal with the same grit and heaviness as thrash metal, but with a slower tempo, would revolutionize and inspire the entire metal industry for literal years to come. However, like many bands in the music industry, Pantera didn't come out of the gate melting everyone's face off with their dancey metal vibes. Pantera's beginning would start with two brothers, Vincent, or Vinnie Paul, and Darrell, known as Dimebag Abbott, who were from the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, and they were blessed with talent, a dad in the music industry, and a spirit that would forever revolutionize the metal scene.
Music runs deep in the Abbott family. Jerry Bob Abbott was born April 8th, 1942, in the small West Texas town of Abilene, Texas. Jerry Bob started on the piano and then took up the guitar by the time he was 15. By 18, he had joined a band and tried his hand touring on the road. At the age of 20, he married a dark-haired, blue-eyed beauty, Norma Carolyn Atkinson, but everyone knew her by her middle name, Carolyn. I personally can't tell you much about Jerry Bob's side of the family, but I can tell you a thing or two about the Atkinsons. They are a beautiful bunch. They're quick to tell a story, quick to get into a tiff, but also quick to get back to loving and cutting up with their family. Jerry Bob and Carolyn's story is a tale as old as time. They married in 1962 and had a bouncing baby boy, Vincent Paul Abbott, in 1964. However, shortly after Vincent was born, the small Abbott family made the move 3 hours east and settled in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, so that Jerry Bob could again try his hand in the music scene. Then, while living in Ennis, Texas, on August 20th, 1966, Jerry Bob, Carolyn, and big brother Vincent welcomed Darrell Lance Abbott. On that day, Vincent didn't just gain a brother, but a best friend. As Vincent and Darrell grew up, their dad, Jerry Bob, continued to stay active in the buzzing music scene there in Dallas. Jerry Bob landed a job as a regular member in a local band, got a business degree, and in 1973 he was hired as a sound engineer at a local recording studio, Pantego Studios. According to sources, Jerry Bob was a music man to his core. He could hear things in ways that others couldn't. He had impeccable rhythmic timing and was really just a perfectionist. Music was a passion, but also a business and needed to be treated as such. The Abbott boys got involved in music programs at school, like most of us do. Vincent, the older brother, originally took up the tuba in the school's band, but Dad, Jerry Bob, wasn't having it. He advised him to lean into drums because he said, quote, "There's no career prospects for a tuba player," and went out to buy Vincent's first drum kit set. Originally, Darrell also wanted to play the drums, but as Jerry Bob said in a 2010 interview with Guitar World, yeah, but Vinnie hogged him and wouldn't give his brother a shot. While Vincent was learning to move around the drums, Darrell, like his dad, picked up his first guitar when he was 12, a Les Paul style Hondo. In that same interview, Jerry Bob said that when he had asked Darrell what he wanted for his 12th birthday, he said it was between a bike and a guitar, to which Jerry added with a laugh, he definitely made the right call on that one. Darrell received his Hondo and a pig nose amplifier for his 12th birthday, and I think everyone knows that this is where it would be said, and the rest is history.
Now, we all know what we are probably all envisioning: two cornbread-fed middle school boys trying to grow their hair out, sulking in the room, being like, "It's not a phase, Mom." But according to family members, Vinnie Paul and Darrell were soft-spoken, preppy dressing, which is wild, blows my mind, and they were Christian-raised Texas kids when they were younger. But it's hard to hide from rock and roll, and in 1978, the guitar sounds and wild stage performances of bands like Kiss, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and Van Halen really took a grip on the Abbott boys and opened up a whole new world of music for them. They were hooked. Jerry Bob and Carolyn were supportive, and in fact, it was said that Jerry Bob would learn Kiss songs on the guitar just so he could teach Darrell, always making sure that Darrell's timing was impeccable. However, Carolyn and Jerry Bob's marriage really started to crumble, and by 1979, the two had divorced, but fortunately remained amicable. The Abbott brothers were also exposed to various country music artists who recorded at the recording studio where Jerry worked. And so it's here, fast forward a couple years to the beginning of the 80s, 1981, and just like their dad before them, Vinnie Paul was asked to join a band along with his high school buddies, Terry Glaze, Tommy Bradford, and Donnie Hart. Vinnie Paul would eventually agree to joining the band, but on one condition, and this is so adorable, that his 15-year-old little brother, Darrell, was allowed to rock out with them as well. Terry Glaze would later comment in an interview that the band didn't want Darrell in the mix because, quote, he was a little scrawny dude and wasn't very good. However, Vinnie Paul made it clear that he and Darrell were a package deal, and this theme really continued throughout their entire life together. But Darrell was good. He was so good, in fact, after winning his 4th guitar contest in the Dallas club scenes, in which Jerry, Bob, and Carolyn all had to chaperone, he was asked to stop entering and just be a judge because he was winning everything. Dean Zielinski, the founder of Dean Guitars, was quoted saying, "From the minute I first met him and heard him play, I just knew there was something different and special about him." I later found out from Jimmy Wallace, who worked at Arnold Morgan Music in Dallas at the time, that Darrell won every single guitar contest that they had. He won a lot of guitars, but the Dean guitars were the only ones he kept.
So here we are, 1981, the band is set. Vincent on the drums, Darrell on lead guitar, Glaze on rhythm guitar, Hart on vocals, and Bradford on bass. Vincent told SiriusXM during an interview that the band went through all the usual kick-ass names, right? Like Gemini or Eternity. But one of Vincent's buddies suggested the name Pantera because it was, quote, a badass race car. Vincent brought it up to the band, and I imagine it was like the skies opened up and the guitar strings amped out from heaven. It was perfect. And in 1981, Pantera was born. The band would later find out that Pantera means panther in Spanish, and as Vincent said, it just built from there. Pantera rocked out together and began trying to get some exposure in the local clubs and music venues. By 1982, vocalist Donnie Hart left the band, and Terry Glaze took over as lead vocalist, leaving all the guitar parts to Darrell. Rex Brown would fill the guitar spot 1 year later. As Pantera started gaining exposure, they began booking shows in local digs throughout Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. During the early years, their sound aligned more with the hair bands mixed with the heavier metal sounds, putting them in this category of what was called glam metal. It was during those years of leopard print, high-top shoes, and permed locks that Darrell picked up the stage name Diamond Darrell. Sources are conflicting. Some say Diamond was inspired by a Kiss song, others say it was linked to Eddie Van Halen, but for whatever reason, that's what he went with. Vincent also found a stage persona and started going by Vinnie Paul. Pantera was gaining attention, but not exploding in the music scene the way that they had hoped. That's when Jerry Bob stepped up from managing the band to producing their sound. In 1983, with Jerry Bob's help, Pantera recorded and released their first record album, Metal Magic, at the Pantego Studios in Arlington, Texas. Between 1984 and 1986, they released 2 more albums with mild success, and it was at that time that the Abbott brothers felt they wanted to move away from Glaze's glam metal and into a style more their own. With Glaze out, it was time to fill a spot. That's when New Orleans native Phil Anselmo heard that the band was looking for a singer. Anselmo's raspy, kind of almost screechy vocals gave an edge and heaviness to the band that was exactly what the Abbott brothers were looking for. In 1988, with the addition of Anselmo on lead vocals and a shift towards a heavy rhythmic vibe, Pantera released their 4th album, Power Metal, and the music industry experienced the birth of groove metal. After dropping Power Metal, the band had a wake-up call. They were done playing dress-up with glam metal drag. Sitting around in a haze of frustration and grit, Vinnie Paul nailed it by saying, "The magic clothes don't play music. We do. Let's just go out there, be comfortable, jeans, t-shirts, whatever, and see where it goes." That moment marked the death of their former era, and from then on, they kind of actually tried to bury their early albums, Power Metal included, because it wasn't as heavy as they liked, kind of like skeletons in a closet.
On a side note, didn't you go to school with an Anselmo?
So I did, and it makes me wonder if, because
they're probably related, because
he's from New Orleans, and let me tell you, was a musical genius when we were in high school, and I think went on to actually perform in the New Orleans circuit. So it makes me kind of want to reach out and see if Keith is related.
Yeah.
This Venn diagram has been just overlapping and overlapping during this case.
For sure. Well, shortly after releasing Power Metal, changing their musical direction and hiring Phil Anselmo as lead singer, Darrell was faced with a decision. That skinny, quote, not very good guitarist that they had to rely on brother Vincent to get him a spot in the band was now asked to fill the lead guitar spot in another band that was growing in popularity, Megadeth. And just like before, Darrell told them that he and Vinnie Paul were a package deal. At the time, Megadeth had Nick Menza on drums, and without them being able to add Vinnie Paul, Darrell declined. So Pantera was full steam ahead. I just think Vinnie Paul is the coolest name. And so I know like his real name is Vincent, and you'll hear me go back and forth, but Vinnie Paul just really flows off the tongue.
It really does. It does.
1989 became Pantera's shot to finally break through the noise. That same year, they teamed up with Walter O'Brien from Concrete Management, who'd ride shotgun as their manager all the way up until the band's final bow in 2003. But it wasn't handed to them. After getting the door slammed in their faces by pretty much every major label, 28 times to be exact, Pantera was still grinding. Then came Atco Records. Derek Schulman, curious about the hype, sent reps Mark Ross and Stevenson Eugenio to check them out in Texas. One show later, Ross was literally on the phone, fired up, telling his boss that they had to sign these guys, and Atco didn't hesitate. By the end of 1989, Pantera was in Pantego Studios, cutting their major label debut. Diamond Darrell shifted to Dimebag. Vinnie Paul stayed steady with the Vinnie Paul, and a new razor-sharp guitar tone emerged that would become the band's everlasting trademark. Pantera released Cowboys from Hell in 1990 and Vulgar Display of Power in 92. During that time, they were sharing the stage with rock legends like AC/DC, Metallica, opening up for Judas Priest, and pretty much living their best groove metal thrash metal life. But not everyone agreed. Anselmo remembers playing live shows after Vulgar Display of Power dropped, and he put it this way, quote, "The aggression, the intensity, the stripped, raw, and bleeding emotion of those songs connected with the audience in a dangerous way. We had a blast playing them because they were more real to us, and I know The people watching knew we were the real deal. And he was right. People loved Pantera and the way their music made them feel. People connected to something bigger, and for some, it was a feeling that they had hoped would last forever. Pantera continued to grow. It spread like wildfire, no thanks to networks like MTV or radio stations, believe it or not. It was said that MTV really quoted or said Pantera was too loud for radio, not pretty enough for MTV. But the tide had already begun, and the music industry would be shaken to the core with the release of Pantera's 7th album, Far Beyond Driven. In fact, in one interview, Vinnie Paul would later recount that MTV hated us. The radio wouldn't play us, we had no media coverage, and 200,000 people went out and bought the record and made it to number 1. I mean, put that in perspective, you know? On March 22nd, 1994, Far Beyond Driven debuted at number 1. Pantera weren't just performers, they were the voice of the working class, the overlooked, kind of the island of misfit toys, as Chelsea always says. They were true rock stars of the people. They were giants in the metal world, but unfortunately, even giants fall.
So here we are. Let's start talking about the unraveling of the metal giant known as Pantera. In the late 90s, Pantera was riding high. Far Beyond Driven, The Great Southern Trendkill, Reinventing the Still, all straight up, heavy, all killer, no filler, right? But behind the scenes, the cracks were spreading. At the center of the storm, Phil Anselmo. Phil had become increasingly distant from the band, literally and creatively. While Dimebag and Vinnie Paul were still based in Texas, cranking out riffs in the same room, Phil was in New Orleans, neck deep in side projects and personal demons. He was fronting bands like Down and Superjoint Ritual, exploring darker sounds and heavier vibes, which, let's be honest, weren't exactly in sync with Pantera's groove metal foundation. Then there were the health issues. After a serious back injury, Phil started self-medicating with alcohol, painkillers, and heroin, which led him down a darker road. The communication between the band members broke down, shows were being canceled, tension hit a boiling point. Then, in September 1999, the Abbott brothers would receive devastating news. Their beloved Carolyn had succumbed to lung cancer just 6 weeks after being diagnosed. It was said that Vinnie Paul kept a 20-foot Christmas tree up in the house year-round after she passed. In 2001, after the Reinventing the Steel tour, things went silent. No more studio time, no new material, just nothing. The Abbott brothers waited for Phil to come back to the table, but he didn't. And eventually, in 2003, Pantera was officially done. Vinnie Paul later said in an interview that they didn't quit Pantera. Pantera quit them. And Dimebag, he was crushed. The band that defined a generation of metal had split, not with a bang, but with a slow, painful drift into silence.
After the dust settled from Pantera's breakup, Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul were not ready to walk away from music, not even close. Fueled by frustration, heartbreak, and the need to keep the heavy alive, they launched a new project, Damage Plan. In 2004, Damage Plan released their first and only album, Newfound Power, which marked a new chapter for Dimebag and Vinnie Paul after Pantera. While it didn't reach the commercial heights of their previous work, debuting at number 38 on the Billboard 200, it still captured attention for its raw energy and groove-heavy sound. Outside of Damage Plan, Dimebag, Vinnie Paul, and former Pantera bassist Rex Brown ended up teaming up with outlaw country legend David Allan Coe for a unique crossover project, Rebel Meets Rebel, blending country and metal in a way only the Abbott brothers could pull off. Damage Plan hit the road, playing nightclubs across the country to support the album, taking the new sound straight to the fans, one packed venue at a time. It felt like the beginning of something powerful, but change, as we know, is really hard, and so are breakups.
Bailey, why do you think some people take breakups or change so hard?
Invisible expectations. Humans live day to day with invisible expectations. People are like, I don't expect anything. Yes, you do. Every single day, all day, you have expectations in your brain about how things are expected to go. For instance, we expect to drive to work and not get in a car accident, right? Like, we don't expect to have a flat tire. We don't expect to run out of gas. We don't expect to get T-boned.
I mean, unless you're my husband who expects danger, lurking, mayhem, lurking around every corner.
That is the vulnerability life trap in schema therapy, right? Where catastrophe is about to strike. But it's, expectations is really, I think, at the center of pain. So anytime when people come to me and they're like, when they have some sort of distress or suffering, there is always an invisible expectation behind it that was not met.
Yeah.
And some of them are super normal, right? Like, I don't think that I'm going to die in childbirth. You know what I mean? Or have complications or anything like that. So it's super normal, but expectations, even as realistic as they are, still set us up to have heartache and pain.
Sure. And it is interesting, this level of obsession and this level of fandom that people or bands like Pantera create, right? I mean, like we talked about, they were reaching people. And, Uncle Mike talks about this in the interview, and I think it's going to be really fascinating for you guys to hear this side of it. But I think obsessed is a good word to describe Nathan Gale, right?
Oh, yeah. This guy.
So here we go. Nathan Gale was obsessed with metal. But there's a difference between being obsessed and being obsessed. Right, Bailey?
Oh, for sure.
Nathan Gale was obsessed. Nathan Miles Gale was born on September 11th, 1979 in Chicago, Illinois, the youngest of 3 sons to Gerald and Mary Gale. His early childhood was spent in the suburbs of Lansing until his parents divorced. Following the separation, Nathan moved in with his mother in Maryville, Ohio, while his older 2 brothers remained with their father in Chicago. Gale began high school at Benjamin Logan High, where he briefly joined the wrestling team, but transferred to Marysville High during his junior year. He later enrolled in a vocational program at the Ohio High Point Career Center focusing on construction and electrical work, and graduated in 1998. After high school, Gale continued living with his mother and worked a series of low-wage jobs. During this time, he began to struggle with substance abuse and started exhibiting signs of paranoia, often claiming that he was being watched. His mother initially dismissed this behavior as just side effects of the drug use, right? After a violent altercation at home that required police involvement, she asked him to leave. Gale became homeless for a period, supporting himself through panhandling and petty theft. He eventually entered a drug rehabilitation program, and afterwards his mother allowed him to return home. His legal troubles during this time were relatively minor, including trespassing charges for skateboarding and an accusation of workplace theft. But then, in February 2002, moved by the events of the 9/11 attacks, Gale enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. His mother, proud of his service, later purchased a Beretta 9mm for him as a Christmas gift after he completed basic training. Gale was stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina with the 2nd Marine Division. However, his military career was cut short. He was discharged in November 2003, well before completing a typical 4-year term. The USMC did not publicly disclose the reasons for his early discharge. According to Gale's mother, he told her that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia during his time in the military. Although he initially returned home with prescription medication, he chose not to continue treatment. The Department of Veteran Affairs helped him find work as a mechanic, and he disclosed his mental health condition to his employer, Rich Sensula. Gale, a towering 6'3" semi-pro football player, was also, like we said, a Marine who had been discharged early. Friends described him as socially awkward and also often intense, someone who just fixated on things. Over time, that fixation zeroed in on Pantera. According to one former friend, Gale had convinced himself that Pantera had stolen his lyrics and even his identity. He once showed up at a friend's house with pages of copied lyrics from Pantera's songs, claiming he wrote them. He spoke often about suing the band and grew more agitated over time. Still, while his behavior raised red flags, no one predicted violence. Nathan Gale was known for this very distinct look: closely cropped red hair, a winter hat, and almost always seen wearing his Columbus Blue Jackets hockey jersey. On December 8th, 2004, wearing the same Blue Jacket jersey, Gale made the short drive from Maryville to Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, to watch Dimebag and Vinnie Paul perform as the new band, Damageplan.
It was on that day, on Wednesday, December 8th, 2004, Damageplan was performing as the headlining act at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. The venue, which had a capacity of 600, sold 250 tickets for the show that evening. To start the eeriness of that night, club manager Rick Cotella and other concertgoers noticed this towering dude lingering in the parking lot during the opening acts. When asked why he was outside, this man replied, "I don't want to see no shitty local bands. I'm going to wait for Damageplan." By the time Damageplan took the stage at 10:15 p.m., the crowd had grown to around 400. Eventually, the man stepped out and began pacing the parking lot, again lingering near the tour bus as if trying to catch a glimpse of Dimebag Darrell or Vinnie Paul. And it turns out that this towering dude was in fact Nathan Gale. At first, Gale was brushed off by the band's head of security, Jeffrey "Mayhem" Thompson. Undeterred, he later approached Aaron Barnes, who was the band's sound engineer, asking again if the brothers were on board. When Barnes told him that they were already inside, Gale swiftly turned and took off running towards the venue. He reached a tall wooden fence enclosing the patio and climbed over it. Mitch Carpenter, a parking lot security guard, saw him scale this fence and gave chase. Inside, not knowing what was transpiring outside, Damageplan had just launched into their opening song, Breathing New Life. And that is when Nathan Gale burst in. He pushed his way through the crowd, past fans and staff, and still being trailed by Carpenter and another bouncer. Gale ended up reaching the stairs near the sunken mosh pit, slipped behind the stage speakers, and vanished from sight. To some, like 19-year-old club assistant Emily Lewis, he just looked like an excited fan trying to stage dive. But Nathan Gale then jumped onto the stage, drew his Beretta 9mm semi-automatic pistol, and walked directly toward Darrell Dimebag Abbott. Gale shot Darrell 4 times at point-blank range, once in the right cheek, again in the left ear, in the back of the head, and the right hand. Darrell was dead before he hit the ground. Joe Dameron, the bassist for Volume Dealer, one of the bands playing, said Gale shouted something, but he couldn't quite make out the words. Some in the crowd initially thought it was part of the performance, with security guard Ryan Melchior recalling people were pumping their fist thinking it was a hoax. After Gale shot Darrell, he turned the gun on the crowd, starting with Damageplan's tour manager Chris Paluska, who was shot once in the chest. Damageplan security chief Jeffrey Thompson tackled Gale from behind, but during the ensuing struggle, Thompson was shot fatally in the chest. Nathan Bray, a fan of Damageplan, rushed onto the stage to help, but he too, unfortunately, was shot in the chest while attempting to help Abbott and Thompson. Aaron Stoney Hawk, an Alrosa Villa employee and former Marine, charged at Gale while he was reloading, trying to tackle him before more damage could happen. But Stoney was shot 6 times, 4 times in the chest, once in the hand, and once in the leg. Travis Burnett, a member of Volume Dealer's road crew, tried to disarm Gale as well, but was grazed by a bullet on his left forearm. He fled when further shots were fired at his head. That's when drum technician John Cat Brooks also attempted to subdue Gale, but he too was shot in the leg before being taken hostage. Now, all of this happened in minutes. Within 3 minutes of the 911 call, Officer James Niggemeyer of the Columbus Division of Police arrived at the scene, entering stealthily in the club through the backstage door. He found his sight and shot Nathan Gale once in the face with a 12-gauge Remington model shotgun, killing him instantly. Gale had a partially loaded magazine in his Beretta and 30 more rounds of ammunition on him at the time of his death, and he had only fired 15 rounds during the attack, but 4 people were dead and 2 others were injured. Fans noticing what had happened actually ended up going to Dimebag, pulling him from the stage, and started performing CPR until paramedics arrived. But unfortunately, by the time paramedics arrived, Darrell Dimebag Abbott was pronounced dead at the scene. At just 38 years old, he was the first fatality of Nathan Gale's crazy rampage. Thompson, 40, and Hawk, 29, were also declared dead at the scene. Bray, who was 23, was taken to Riverside Methodist Hospital, where he too was pronounced dead at 11:10 p.m. Paluska and Brooks were both transported to the hospital, where they survived and eventually recovered from their injuries. Burnett was treated at the scene and declined further medical transport. Vinnie Paul escaped to safety offstage amid the chaos, rushed to the hospital, where unfortunately he would learn of the fate of his brother and other band members.
Following the tragic events, an autopsy performed by the Franklin County Coroner's Office revealed that Gale had no drugs, prescription or otherwise, in his system at the time of death. It's safe to say that he was in at least an unmedicated right mind. Officer James Niggemeyer, the police officer involved in the use of deadly force, was brought before a grand jury as part of standard procedure to assess whether any misconduct had occurred. Prosecutor Ron O'Brien did not expect charges to be filed against James, and on May 23, 2005, he was cleared of any wrongdoing. Following the incident, James received several honors for his action during the shooting. He was a finalist for the Bravery Award from America's Most Wanted, received the Distinguished Law Enforcement Valor Award from Ohio Attorney General Jim Petro, and was named the 2005 Law Enforcement Officer of the Year by the National Rifle Association. Gale's mother also referred to James as a hero, praising him in a statement to the press. "I give that man credit. You'll never know how many lives he saved." James continued to serve as a first responder for 3 years before transitioning to a robbery detective role, following a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder and severe anxiety. He left the Columbus Police Department in 2011 for a new position within the city, and by 2014 remained in touch with both Cotella and Hawk's brother, Andy. The shooting raised significant concerns in the music community about concert safety and the increasing number of fans jumping onto the stage. Anthrax guitarist Scott Ian, reflecting on the incident, remarked that his perspective on stage rushers had changed drastically, saying, quote, "I don't give a fuck how much fun you're having. Stay the off the stage." In the aftermath, many venues heightened security protocols by hiring off-duty officers, conducting more thorough checks of bags and pockets, and sometimes reviewing set lists to anticipate potential disruption. However, by 2014, Cannibal Corpse drummer Paul Mazurkiewicz and We Are Harlot guitarist Jeff George observed that security measures had become more relaxed, largely due to the rising costs associated with such protocol. After Christina Grimmie was tragically shot by a fan in 2016 meet and greet in Florida, the Pantera Facebook account called for increased security measures to protect performers, particularly in venues without metal detectors.
Yeah, and I think that literally the Damage Plan massacre that killed Dimebag Darrell and 3 other people was really the starting point to hardcore security at concert.
Yeah.
Because back then, it was part of the culture, right? Like walking in, walking out, like, you know, not having all of the security and restrictions, like it was part of the vibe.
Sure. I mean, they would do quick pat downs sometimes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it wasn't this like metal detectors, you know, carrying a clear or a see-through bag. It was nowhere near that level.
Yeah.
And kind of in a quick side note, Vinnie Paul and the Abbott family actually ended up suing the nightclub, the venue, because of their lack of security. Yeah. Which, I mean, you know what I mean? And anywho, we'll get into some theories, but I do think that incident was a pivotal moment in what we're now seeing as far as security at musical and other events.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of theories, some have speculated that the tension between Phil Anselmo and Dimebag Darrell may have fueled Nathan Gale's motive for the shooting. Just weeks before, during a 2004 interview with Metal Hammer magazine, Anselmo had expressed his disdain for Dimebag. He said, quote, "He would attack me vocally, and just knowing that he was so much smaller than me and I could fucking kill him like a piece of vapor, you know? He would turn into vapor, his chin would at least, if I fucking smacked it. And he knows that. The world should know that. So physically, of course, he deserves to be beaten severely. But of course, that's criminal, and I won't do such a thing. Really, I just let him prattle on." But this theory has been dismissed, and although Anselmo was unable to attend the memorial service, he released an emotional video statement expressing his grief and sorrow over the loss of his former bandmate. Investigators found no evidence, no CDs, magazines, or other media linking Gale to Anselmo, Pantera, or Damageplan. Even Rex Brown, the bassist for both Pantera and Damageplan, questioned the idea that the fallout between Anselmo and Darrell Abbott played a role in the tragedy. He said, "Vinnie would not have anything to do with Phil, period. He thought that that was the reason his brother was dead. I disagree with that. I think this was a nut that had already been out there planning and premeditating whatever move he was going to make." Now, further accounts from Gale's past only reinforce the belief that he was mentally unstable. According to a former friend of his, Mark Brake, Nathan Gale would pretend to pet an invisible dog and once claimed that God had instructed him to kill Marilyn Manson. And I wasn't there. I can't speak between the beef between Anselmo and the Abbott brothers or what have you, but Nathan Gale really, that's hallmark indications of some really severe, significant mental health issues.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's such a tension for me on stuff like that, right? I think he was, a quote, disturbed individual, right? And it was just a sad event, any way you slice it. Then on December 14th, 2004, the music world gathered to honor Darrell Dimebag Abbott, the revered Pantera and Damageplan guitarist, tragically slain during a performance in Columbus, Ohio. On a quick side note, my husband was not allowed to go to the funeral because of its connection with all things, not Christian. But I think his mom and dad went, which, rude.
And we get into that a lot more in the interview.
Yeah. The private funeral service in Arlington, Texas was attended by family, friends, and notable musicians, including Eddie Van Halen, Zakk Wylde, and Jerry Cantrell. Eddie Van Halen, whom Dimebag deeply admired, made a heartfelt contribution to the service. A few weeks before his death, Dimebag had met Van Halen and expressed his desire for a replica of Eddie's iconic black and yellow striped guitar known as Bumblebee, featured on the back cover of Van Halen 2. Eddie had promised to craft a special one for him. In a gesture of profound respect, Eddie brought the original 1979 Bumblebee guitar to the funeral, stating, "An original should have an original." This is like choking me up. Sorry, I'm like having to take a break. Like, this is really sad. He chose not to view Dimebag's body, preferring to remember him as he was during their meeting. Instead, he entrusted the guitar to Dimebag's partner, Rita Haney, who placed it in the casket, ensuring Dimebag was laid to rest with the instrument that had inspired him so deeply. The public memorial service that followed was attended by thousands of fans and featured tributes from fellow musicians. Eddie Van Halen addressed the crowd, sharing a voicemail from Dimebag in which he expressed his gratitude for a recent performance, calling it, quote, "the most awesome, uplifting, euphoric, spiritual rock and roll extravaganza ever." Eddie reflected, "I'm here for the same reason as everyone else, to give some love back. This guy was full of life. He lived and breathed rock and roll." Dimebag Darrell was laid to rest beside his mother Carolyn at the Moore Memorial Garden Center in Arlington, Texas. His casket, donated by Gene Simmons, was a custom Kiss casket, reflecting Dimebag's admiration for the band. The ceremonies underscored the profound impact Dimebag had on the music community and the deep respect he commanded among his peers.
After the tragic death of his brother, Darrell Dimebag Abbott, in 2004, Vinnie Paul's life was deeply, deeply marked by grief. But he did remain active in music and dedicated to honoring his brother's legacy. Musically, Vinnie Paul eventually returned to the stage. And can you even imagine the trauma and the PTSD of even performing again after seeing your brother killed in front of you on stage? I can't even imagine.
Wow.
In 2006, Vinnie Paul co-founded the heavy metal band Hell Yeah, teaming up with members of Mudvayne and Nothing Face. Though initially hesitant to join another band, understandably so, he said the connection with the Hell Yeah members helped him heal. He remained Hell Yeah's drummer until his death, contributing to several albums and touring internationally. Now, everybody who knew Vinnie Paul will say the same thing. He never fully recovered from losing his brother, from his brother's murder. He rarely spoke about it in interviews and refused to reconcile with former Pantera frontman Phil Anselmo, again, because he believed that had contributed to his brother's death. Vinnie and Dimebag's bond had been extremely close. They were not just bandmates, but they were best friends, brothers, housemates. So the loss on Vinnie Paul was really profound. Despite the pain, though, Vinnie Paul maintained his fun-loving, larger-than-life persona, known for hosting wild parties at his Texas home, famous for its over-the-top rock store decor and hospitality. He continued to be a beloved figure in the metal community, admired for both his drumming talent and his generosity. But unfortunately, on June 22nd, in 2018, Vinnie Paul passed away at the age of 54 from natural causes. The official ruling is dilated cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease. He was buried alongside his brother and their mother, Carolyn, at Moore Memorial Gardens in Arlington, Texas, fittingly in a custom kiss casket just like his brother. And to close this out, we wanted to share some really powerful and heartfelt things that people, fellow musicians, friends, family, fans, have said over the years about Darrell Dimebag Abbott and Vinnie Paul, capturing their legacy, their talent, and the love that they spread through music and life.
Zakk Wylde, who was Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist and one of Dime's closest friends, was quoted saying, "He wasn't just a guitar player, he was a force of nature. And more importantly, he was my brother."
Judas Priest's Rob Halford said, "Dimebag was a total sweetheart and a musical genius. His playing was fiery, expressive, and instantly recognizable."
Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters and Nirvana said, "Dimebag was the kind of guy who walked into a room and instantly made it better. A true rock and roll spirit."
Slipknot's Corey Taylor said, "There was nobody like Dime. He could make you laugh your ass off and melt your face off with a solo, sometimes in the same minute."
In a short interview with Loudwire, Jonathan Davis, the frontman for Korn, recalled how Dimebag and Vinnie Paul would always attend their shows when they came through Dallas, and that Dimebag would actually get on to Korn's guitarists for not rocking out guitar solos. And Jonathan Davis said about Dimebag, he was one of the greatest guitar players ever. I mean, if there were no Dimebag Darrell, there would be no Korn.
Alice in Chains' Jerry Cantrell said about Vinnie, "Vinnie was one of the best to ever sit behind a drum kit and one of the kindest people I've ever known."
Phil Anselmo, even though they never officially reconciled, said, "Vinnie was a great drummer and an even better human being when we were close. He loved his brother deeply and never stopped fighting for his memory."
Motley Crue's Nikki Sixx said, "Vinnie had the kind of energy that pulled people together. He was all about the good times, but he played with serious heart."
And Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses said both Vinnie and Dime made you feel like family. They had no rock star ego, just pure love for the fans, the music, and their friends.
Together, Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul are remembered as absolute legends, not only for their musicianship, but for their warmth, their humor, their loyalty, and quite frankly, their rebellion, right? They helped absolutely define a generation of metal, and the stories told about them reflect not just admiration, but deep love.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. The American Heart Association actually has an article on Vinnie Paul and the fact that he passed away from a cardiac episode. And in the article, they talk about, research is starting to link things like severe trauma or severe loss to cardiac episodes. And I think you guys, I hope you guys enjoy it in the interview. But one of the most, I don't know, it was really kind of a profound moment interviewing Uncle Mike, was talking about the fact that, Uncle Mike was like, I think Vinnie Paul died from a broken heart. I think he just, he just loved his brother.
Couldn't really figure out how to go on, afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, he made it happen, but and you'll hear this in the interview, but Doc is even like, it gutted him. It took his heart away, he was never the same after that.
Oh. So, this was like I said, this has been a really fun case to research. It's crazy. They actually have the original footage of the massacre that was released. It was actually covered by Cooper Anderson. Is that his name? Anderson Cooper.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was when he was working at a local news station. But yeah, I mean, the video footage is out there, and it is. It's just such a surreal. You can tell that everybody's just like, "Oh yeah, this is so cool," and then it's like, "Oh crap, this is real."
Yeah.
It's just this wild, breakdown. And at one point, one of the band members is like, Dimebag's dead. They just killed Dimebag. It is really the most surreal footage. So I don't know. I mean, I always like to look on, what are the good things that came from this. I'm thankful that we have updated security now. I hate it, right? I hate that we have to live in a world with updated security, but I'm glad that we have it. And in some of the last interviews that they did with Vinnie Paul before his passing, he talked about how he really was at peace with the incident, even though he wasn't talking to Phil Anselmo anymore. And I think that's another aspect of processing and grief and loss is, and I don't know, Bailey, I'd love to hear your aspect on it. I personally think it's okay. It's okay to forgive a person and to be at peace with a person, but to also choose to still have that boundary of we're still not talking. But
yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to stuff like this, it's okay to do what you choose. Obviously not retaliate with more violence. I don't agree with that, but you don't want to forgive, you don't have to, you want to hang on to that resentment and that grudge and that hatred until the day you die, you're allowed to do that. But I think it's cutting your nose to spite your face after so many years of carrying that around, right?
Sure.
And you hear a lot of people say that they forgive not for that, the person, they forgive for themselves.
Sure. But and as always, I feel like we talk about this in a lot of cases. Red flags, you can't. What do you always say, Bailey? I'm going to look at a red flag and decide that it's not red. In fact, it's pink, and pink is now my favorite color.
Yeah.
Red flags are there. Our body, our intuition, I think, recognizes them. How often do we hear in these cases, yeah, there were some red flags, but I never thought that they'd actually do it. I never thought that it would result in violence. I never thought. I don't know. Maybe it's time we start paying attention to red flags.
Yeah, for sure. But when you guys get off here, log off, do the universe a solid, do the Abbott Brothers a solid, and go listen to at least one really good, gnarly Pantera song. That's what I'm about to do.
Yeah, and I would actually encourage you guys to find some of their first albums, even though they didn't want people really listening to that because it was glam metal. That stuff's pretty awesome as well. It's definitely a different vibe, but I think you guys will enjoy it.
That's right. And as always, you guys, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild, crazy metal ride. And we'll catch you on the wild side. Bye, guys.